What Americans call Chinese food is one of the most familiar tastes in the country. It comes in white paper cartons. It's eaten late at night. It's sweet, salty, crunchy, and comforting. It's ordered without thinking, and for millions of Americans, it feels timeless, like it has always existed exactly this way. But it hasn't. If you travel across China today, or even 100 years ago, you won't find orange chicken. You won't find General Tso's chicken. You won't find chop suey, crab rangoon, or fortune cookies. What Americans recognize as Chinese food does not come from China in the way most people imagine. This isn't because Chinese immigrants forgot how to cook their own food. It's because the cuisine Americans know was shaped by survival, discrimination, and adaptation. American Chinese food was not created to preserve tradition. It was created to endure America. To understand why American Chinese food tastes nothing like food in China, we have to return to the middle of the 19th century, when Chinese immigrants first arrived in the United States in large numbers. They came during the gold rush. They came to build railroads. They came to escape poverty and instability in southern China. Most were young men from Guangdong province, bringing with them a culinary tradition that emphasized balance, freshness, subtlety, and regional specificity. Their cooking relied on ingredients that were seasonal and local. Light sauces, fresh vegetables, seafood, rice prepared simply, meals shared communally. It was food deeply connected to place. America was not that place. The United States in the 1800s was hostile to Chinese immigrants. They were segregated, mocked, and blamed for economic hardship. Anti-Chinese sentiment turned violent. Laws were passed to limit their rights, restrict their movement, and eventually ban their immigration altogether. Chinese people were pushed into tightly packed neighborhoods that would become Chinatowns. They were excluded from most professions. They were barred from owning land. They were denied citizenship. And in many cities, one of the only businesses they were allowed to operate was food service. Restaurants were not a cultural choice. They were an economic necessity. But the food Chinese immigrants knew how to cook was impossible to reproduce in America. The ingredients were wrong. The vegetables were unfamiliar. The seafood was different. Spices were scarce or unavailable. Cooking oils were expensive. Even rice was not always easy to obtain. So they adapted. They substituted ingredients. They used what was cheap and available. They adjusted flavors to suit American tastes. They fried food because Americans liked crisp textures. They sweetened sauces because Americans preferred sugar. They thickened gravies because Americans associated thickness with richness. This was not corruption of cuisine. It was translation. One of the earliest results of this translation was chop suey. Chop suey was never a traditional Chinese dish. It was a flexible mixture of meat, vegetables, and sauce, designed to use scraps and stretch ingredients. It was cheap, filling, and customizable. And Americans loved it. By the late 1800s, chop suey became a national obsession. Chop suey houses opened across the country. Newspapers wrote about it. Politicians dined on it. It became fashionable for white Americans to eat Chinese food, even while supporting laws that excluded Chinese people themselves. Food became a safe way to consume foreigners without confronting the people behind it. Chop suey didn't claim to be ancient. It didn't pretend to be traditional. It simply worked. It fed people. It made money. It allowed Chinese immigrants to survive in a society that otherwise rejected them. As immigration restrictions intensified with the Chinese Exclusion Act, Chinese communities became increasingly isolated. New immigrants could not arrive. Families were separated. Cultural exchange slowed. At the same time, Chinese restaurants became the primary point of contact between Americans and Chinese culture. But this contact was one-sided. Americans dictated the terms. They wanted food that felt exotic, but not too strange. Different, but not challenging. Menus were rewritten in English. Dishes were renamed. Flavors were standardized. Regional differences disappeared. Complexity was flattened into a single idea of Chinese food. This wasn't accidental. It was commercial strategy. American diners wanted predictability. They wanted the same flavors everywhere. They wanted sweetness, saltiness, crunch. They wanted fast service and large portions. Restaurants that delivered those things survived. Those that didn't failed. Over time, recipes hardened. What began as adaptation became tradition of its own. American Chinese food stopped changing as rapidly, even as food in China continued to evolve. By the early 20th century, American Chinese food was no longer Chinese food adapted to America. It was its own cuisine. World War II accelerated this process. After the war, suburbanization reshaped American eating habits. Families moved away from city centers. Convenience became king. Takeout culture exploded. Chinese restaurants adapted again. Food had to travel. It had to stay hot. It had to be portable. It had to be eaten with one hand. This is when the iconic takeout box appeared. Designed not in China, but in America, the folded paper carton became a symbol of Chinese food everywhere. Fortune cookies followed a similar path. They were not Chinese. They were invented in California, inspired by Japanese crackers and American novelty culture. But Americans expected them, so Chinese restaurants adopted them. Expectation became reality. Cream cheese entered the picture. Deep frying intensified. Sweet sauces thickened further. Dishes like orange chicken and General Tso's chicken emerged not from Chinese kitchens, but from American ones. General Tso's chicken, in particular, reveals everything about this transformation. Named after a Qing dynasty general who never ate it, the dish was invented in the United States. It was designed to be bold, sweet, and crispy. It appealed directly to American palates. It succeeded wildly. Meanwhile, food in China followed a different path. Regional cuisines remained distinct. Sichuan food embraced heat. Cantonese food emphasized freshness. Northern cuisines relied on wheat. Southern cuisines celebrated rice. Chinese food in China evolved naturally, influenced by geography, history, and internal migration. American Chinese food evolved commercially, shaped by customer demand. The two cuisines diverged completely. This divergence is often framed as loss, as inauthenticity, as corruption, but that framing misunderstands immigrant food. Immigrant food is not meant to preserve the past unchanged. It is meant to survive the present. It adapts because it must. It changes because the people cooking it are changing. American Chinese food reflects the experience of Chinese immigrants navigating a hostile society. It reflects compromise, creativity, resilience. Every modification tells a story. Every sweet sauce reflects an attempt to be accepted. Every fried dish reflects an effort to attract customers. Every standardized menu reflects the pressure to conform. American Chinese food did not erase Chinese identity. It expressed it under constraint. And over time, it became deeply American. By the mid-20th century, Chinese food was one of the first non-European cuisines to become fully mainstream in the United States. It introduced Americans to eating outside their own cultural traditions. It normalized multicultural dining. For many Americans, Chinese food was their first experience with foreign flavors. It opened doors. It expanded palates. It quietly reshaped American food culture. Today, debates about authenticity miss this history. They assume that food must remain pure to be valid. But food has never been pure. It has always moved with people. American Chinese food is not a failed version of Chinese food. It is a successful version of immigrant food. It is a record of adaptation under pressure. When Americans say Chinese food doesn't taste like food in China, they're right. It was never meant to. It was meant to taste like America, at a particular moment in history, shaped by specific forces. And that makes it worth understanding, not dismissing. American Chinese food carries the story of exclusion laws, labor struggles, and cultural negotiation. It carries the story of people who were barred from citizenship but fed the nation anyway. It carries the story of how flavor can cross boundaries even when people cannot. This food did not come from China unchanged. It came from Chinese immigrants who changed it. And in doing so, they changed America.